Okay, so I think this is recording. Welcome to our first online English lesson. We're going to read a poem today, and that poem is called The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. Quite a thematically appropriate poem, I think. It's about desolation and hope. So in this crazy season, it's probably a poem that we could read and enjoy. So what's going to happen is when I finish talking, I want you to hit pause, go and get your poetry anthology. If you don't have it, if you just Google The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy, then what's going to happen is I'm going to read it out for you. Then I want you to pause again, read it yourself, and write down your first impressions. So maybe mood and atmosphere. What mood does this poem have? Or themes. What seem to be the main themes? How does it make you feel? What's like your gut reaction to this poem? Any language devices you notice, that's good as well. And then I'm going to give you my thoughts about it. And then on Teams, I'm going to upload some more questions and so we can study it in more detail. So I'll assume you've got the poem. If not, just click pause and go and get it. And I'm going to read it to you. So this is The Darkling Thrush by Thomas Hardy. I leant upon a coppice gate when frost was spectre grey, and winter's dregs made desolate the weakening eye of day. The tangled vine stems scored the sky like strings of broken lyres, and all mankind that haunted nigh had sought their household fires. The land's sharp features seemed to be the century's corpse outliant, his crypt the cloudy canopy, the wind his death lament. The ancient pulse of germ and birth was shrunken hard and dry, and every spirit upon earth seemed fervorless as I. At once a voice arose among the bleak twigs overhead, in a full-hearted evensong of joy illuminated. An aged thrush, frail, gaunt, and small, in blast-beruffled plume, had chosen thus to fling his soul upon the growing gloom. So little cause for carolings of such ecstatic sound was written on terrestrial things afar or nigh around, that I could think there trembled through his happy good-night air some blessed hope, whereof he knew, and I was unaware. Okay, that was The Darkling Thrush. Now, like I said, pause. What do you think? Then once you've done that, come back, and I'm going to give you some of my ideas. Okay, I assume you paused and come back. I'm just opening my notes. Where are they? Here we go. So the first thing I would like to say about this poem is that atmosphere of desolation that is running all the way, certainly through the first two stanzas. It's this atmosphere of desolation and hopelessness. Like it's a wintry setting. And we have descriptions, images of things like the frost being spectre grey. That word spectre means ghost. It's as if the frost has this really ghoulish, almost haunted, almost satanic quality to it. And then that continues. We have winter's dregs. Dregs are the final few mouthfuls of beer or some drink right at the bottom, the ones you don't really want to drink because everything good has just been soaked up or drunk, and it's just what's left, which is not very pleasant. Or we have the weakening eye of day. If you think of maybe a grandparent or an elderly person, their eyes are weak. Their eyes are weak and blurry, and they can't really see properly sometimes. So reading through this first stanza, it's like life has been sucked out of the earth. That atmosphere of desolation is just so thick. Then we also have the tangled vine stems score the sky. Score is like scratch. So the vine stems, the trees or the branches, he means, are just scratching the sky. If you think, I don't know, like a really unpleasant winter wind, just scratching you. That's kind of what I feel reading this. Next line, strings of broken lyres. Again, a musical instrument. Music we normally associate with joy and life, but these are broken, these lyres. Lyre is also a Greek instrument. So when I read that, I associate Greek civilization or classical civilization with all its uh, wisdom and creativity and philosophy, but it's broken. So there's maybe a sense of civilization itself broken in this poem. And that continues in the second stanza. The land is described as a corpse or a dead body. Or more specifically, I think I'll change that. It's not the land that's described as a dead body, it's the century. Interesting context note is that he wrote this poem in 1899 or 1898, just at the turn of the century. So not only is it the land that is dead and desolate, not only is it the year that is dead and desolate, it's the century. And that makes me wonder, what is it about the 19th century that would lead Thomas Hardy to describe it in such desolate terms? Well, if you think about what you know about what happened in England in the 19th century, it was the beginning of industrialization. So we had the beginning of factories, steam engines, the beginning of the destruction of the environment in order to make machines. For example, forests being torn up to provide railways, or coal, these big piles of coal slag, which kind of blighted the landscape. It was also the century of people leaving the land and moving to the cities. So being uprooted from a way of life that they had lived probably for centuries, where their life hadn't been that different from the life of their parents, their grandparents, their parents, going back through generations. They left that behind and moved to the cities to work in life that was disconnected from the natural world, working in factories under horrible conditions and long hours, without that real tangible connection to the natural world they would have had, or they probably would have had more, when they were farming people living in the countryside. And not only that, there was a disconnection of community as well. Communities were broken up as people moved away and lived in new cities without those deep links that had existed for centuries. So I'm wondering if in Thomas Hardy's mind, there's a sense of the century's corpse, the destruction of a way of life, and this really vibrant, vivid sense of relationship with the natural world that is beginning to die then, and is even more so the case now. So perhaps that's why the century is just a corpse. It's a lot of the life has been sucked out of England in this. Anything else I want to say about context? Yes, context AO3 is, if you look at the exam board of one of the mark schemes, it will say, do students show an awareness of context of productions, when the text was produced, written, and reception? So how does our context now, or at another time in history, affect how we read it? If you think about the 20th century, we thought a bit about the 19th. The 20th century was a century of massive change. I mean, change begun in the 19th century, but increased like on steroids throughout the 20th century. It was also a century of massive destruction. A few about 15, 16 years after he wrote this, we had World War I with its colossal destruction of human life and the huge changes in life that continued from then. So maybe we could think about this desolate mood, and as we look back, we kind of see the desolate mood anticipating some of the destruction of the 20th century, specifically World War I and World War II. So it almost, to borrow another term, foreshadowing. It's like the desolation in this poem foreshadows the desolation that was going to occur in the 20th century and the increasing environmental destruction. I mean, he describes the century as a corpse, the end of the 19th. I don't know, would someone describe the 20th century as a corpse after everything that happened in that century? So those are a few ideas if you want to think about context. Change, destruction of ways of life, severing of a link from the natural world, that kind of thing. Let's move on to the third stanza, because in the third stanza the mood changes. After the atmosphere of desolation, we have the appearance of a thrush. Another context point, a thrush in Romanticism signifies hope or joy or life or escape from suffering. Maybe we need to go back over to that word Romanticism. So Romanticism was a poetic movement which involved writers such as Coleridge. We've looked at Coleridge's poems, Wordsworth, we've looked at Wordsworth, and Blake, and some of the things they valued. They valued the natural world. They almost worshipped it in some way. They tended not to like city life. They thought it was dirty, separated man from his natural environment, i.e. nature, almost satanic. I'm going on a tangent here, but if you know that poem Jerusalem, William Blake describes mills as satanic. These factories that take people away from farming and that relationship with the land and put them in an unnatural place with these horrible working conditions. So they're not very keen on industrialization or city life, romantics. So that's Romanticism. And in Romanticism, one of the symbols they would use is a bird that signifies hope. And that's kind of what we have here. The speaker hears this bird appear. Interestingly, it's an aged bird. It's frail, it's gaunt, it's small. It doesn't seem very strong. It doesn't seem like it would survive long. In fact, it's hard to see how it survives in this wintry landscape if it's so frail and gaunt and small. Reminds me a little bit of the story of Pandora's box. Maybe you know that story. If not, you can look it up. I'll tell it briefly now. But Pandora opens a box, and out of that box come all the bad things in the world, like war, illness, misery, suffering, lies, strife. Everything that makes life unpleasant comes out of that box, and that's why it's in the world, according to the myth. But then right at the end, something else tries to get out the box as well, and it's the smallest voice or thing in the box, and it's hope. And it's the image seems to be in this poem and in that story, the hope is fragile, it's small, it's hard to spot like a thrush, but it is there. It is there, and it's still choosing to sing. So in this terrible world we're in this poem, there is this something to latch onto, which is joy and hope and life. Okay, I think that's enough for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post some questions on the Teams, and then tomorrow, when we normally have lessons, I say tomorrow, Friday, this is Thursday as I'm recording it, I'm going to be around on Teams. So hopefully what I'd really like is a bit of conversation starting. Post your comments and I will try and respond. Thinking about AO4 as well, that's comparison, exploring connections across text. I'm going to give us some questions. How could we compare the themes in this poem to some of the other ones we've already studied? Maybe to autumn, for example. To autumn was, well, obviously in autumn. How is autumn personified or portrayed versus winter? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Okay, I think we'll finish there. I hope you're all well, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Any comments you have, please leave them, and I'm going to be making more as we go on. Okay, bye-bye.